The phrase cut through the air like a sharp blade. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known for her incisive statements and unwavering defense of progressive causes, had never been afraid to confront the established power. But when her words hit Barron Trump, the president's youngest son, a 19-year-old who had always preferred silence over the spotlight, no one expected what would come next. Within minutes, a silent, calculated, and devastatingly eloquent response went viral on social media, rewriting the narrative of who Barron Trump was and forcing the entire country to confront its own prejudices about privilege, youth, and legacy. Between comments about free education and student debt cancellation, she mentioned the children of the political elite, those who, in her words, never had to fight for anything because they were already born at the top. And then came the blow. Look at Barron Trump, 19 years old. Stern School of Business at NYU. You think he got there on merit? He's just living off his father. The camera shook slightly in her hands as she continued, but the message had already been launched into the digital world, a world that never forgets and rarely forgives. Unlike his older half-siblings, Barron had never sought the spotlight. Melania Trump had built an invisible wall around her son, protecting him from the political toxicity that had consumed the family. But at 19, studying business in Manhattan, involved in artificial intelligence projects, and with supposed million-dollar investments in cryptocurrencies, Barron was no longer just Donald Trump's son. He was building something of his own, silently, meticulously. When the clip from AOC's livestream began circulating, the internet immediately divided. The Congresswoman's supporters applauded her courage in calling out privilege by name. Critics accused her of attacking a young adult who had barely begun his public life. But amid the digital chaos, there was a notable silence. Barron Trump didn't respond, didn't tweet, didn't post, didn't even give any sign he'd seen the comment. That silence, however, was just the calm before the storm. 43 minutes after AOC's video went viral, a verified account that rarely posted at Barron WT Rump published something that would change everything. It wasn't an angry counterattack, it wasn't an emotional defense of the Trump surname. It was something far more powerful, an image. The photo showed a computer screen, partially visible, with complex programming code related to machine learning and AI algorithms. In the caption, just one sentence: privilege is having a platform. Purpose is what you build when nobody's watching. No mention of AOC, no mention of the comment, just a silent truth that resonated louder than any shout. The post didn't deny the privilege of his surname. It transcended that narrative by showing work, dedication, and a deliberate choice to build his own identity. Meanwhile, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez watched. In real time, one of her most scathing criticisms transformed into fuel for something she hadn't anticipated: the humanization of someone she had reduced to a stereotype. Because what no one knew yet, not AOC, not the millions sharing Barron's response, was that post wasn't just a reply, it was an invitation, a challenge, a door opening to a conversation the country needed to have, but no one had the courage to start. And in the coming days, the world would discover that behind Barron Trump's silence was a sharper mind, a clearer purpose, and a much more complex story than any headline or political comment could capture. But this time, the silent young man had the floor. Barron wasn't just a business student at NYU Stern, he was deeply involved in artificial intelligence projects, had supposedly created a digital mining operation valued at $150 million, and, according to unconfirmed rumors, was advising his own mother, Melania Trump, on AI-related technology initiatives. He wasn't simply living off his father. He was building his own empire, discreetly, away from the spotlights that had consumed his older siblings. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, meanwhile, faced a storm she hadn't anticipated. Her communications team tried to control the damage, while conservative commentators celebrated what they called the most silent defeat in modern political history. But AOC wasn't someone who backed down easily. At 35, she had built her political career, challenging giants, corporations, billionaires, and even members of her own Democratic Party. She had faced death threats, public humiliation attempts, and become the most recognizable face of American progressivism. A viral response from a rich teenager wouldn't destroy her, but for the first time in a long while, she hesitated, because that post from Barron wasn't just smart, it was emotionally devastating in its simplicity. He hadn't shouted, hadn't defended his father, hadn't attacked her, he had simply shown his work. Meanwhile, in his Manhattan apartment, protected by a discreet but omnipresent security team, Barron Trump watched the chaos unfold. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. At 19, with a height that made him stand out in any environment and a posture that radiated calculated calm, Barron had learned something fundamental about power. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. Throughout his father's presidency, he observed, saw how impulsive tweets destroyed careers, how poorly chosen words created unnecessary crises, how public rage consumed people from the inside out. Melania Trump, his mother and fierce guardian, had taught him a lesson that Donald Trump would never learn. Strategic silence is more powerful than 1,000 angry words. It was calculated, precise, and that precision revealed something few had considered. Barron Trump was playing chess while the rest of the internet played checkers. Sources close to the family, always anonymous, always cautious, began whispering to journalists about the real Barron. They said he was fluent in multiple programming languages, that he was developing machine learning algorithms to optimize financial markets, that he had refused offers from Silicon Valley tech companies to maintain his independence. They said he was nothing like his father. But perhaps more dangerous precisely because of that, because while Donald Trump was fire and fury, Barron was ice and strategy. A young journalist, taking advantage of the presence of prominent AI developers, asked directly, "What do you think of Barron Trump's response to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez?" The room fell silent. And then, to everyone's surprise, one of the founders of one of the world's largest AI companies responded, "Look, I don't want to get into politics, but I know the kid's work. And it's serious. Very serious. He's not playing with basic code. He's working on things that most undergrads couldn't even comprehend." The validation came from where no one expected, not from politicians, not from commentators, but from technological peers, who had nothing to gain by defending the Trump surname. She was in her congressional office, surrounded by stacks of legislative proposals about the Green New Deal and labor reforms, causes for which she had sacrificed any semblance of normal personal life. And there, in that moment, something changed inside her. It wasn't exactly regret, it was recognition. She had made the same mistake her political adversaries so often made with her, reducing a complex person to a convenient stereotype. How many times had they called her just a bartender trying to pretend to be a congresswoman? How many times had they minimized her academic achievements, graduating cum laude in economics and international relations from Boston University, because they didn't fit the narrative they wanted to sell? And now, looking at the computer screen, she realized she had done exactly that to Barron Trump. Because the entire country was watching, waiting for the next move in this improbable political chess game. And both Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Barron Trump knew that what came next would define not just this narrative, but something much bigger, a conversation about privilege, merit, youth, and the impossible weight of public expectations that neither of them had asked for. The question echoing in the minds of millions of Americans was simple but profound. Is it possible to recognize privilege and merit at the same time? Or are we condemned to choose one and destroy the other? Not through a vague or corporate apology, but with the same brutal frankness that had made her one of the most respected and feared voices of American progressivism. During an Instagram livestream, sitting in the same chair where she had launched the comment that started it all, AOC looked directly at the camera and said, "I reduced Barron Trump to a stereotype, and that was unfair. Not because he deserves protection for being who he is, but because every young person deserves to be seen beyond the surname they carry." The sincerity cut through the digital noise. Within minutes, the livestream had 500,000 viewers. And then she did something even braver. "I'm sending a direct message to Barron. Not publicly, because that would be performative. But if he accepts, I'd like to talk. Not for cameras, not for headlines. Just to people who carry the weight of impossible expectations trying to understand what that really means." On social media, millions of young people between 18 and 25 began using the hashtag #ListenToEachOther. It wasn't about choosing sides, it was about recognizing something American politics had completely lost: the ability to see nuance, to recognize complexity, to admit error without total destruction. Barron Trump, whose generation had been raised on polarization algorithms and digital echo chambers, paradoxically represented a possibility of something different: a digital conservatism, fluent in technology, less concerned with past culture wars and more focused on building economic futures. The image showed two figures talking on a discreet bench near the library. Alexandria Ocasio, with her characteristic glasses and combative posture, even in private moments, and Barron Trump, whose impressive height made him impossible to hide. They weren't shouting, weren't posing, were simply talking. The photo went viral instantly, not as a scandal, but as a symbol. A symbol that perhaps, just perhaps, the next generation of American leaders wasn't doomed to repeat the toxic mistakes of the previous one. Barron, who had remained silent about politics throughout his adolescence, made his second public post weeks later, an image of programming code with the caption, "Building bridges requires as much work as building walls, but only one of them leads somewhere." It was ambiguous enough to avoid clear political affiliation, but powerful enough to resonate across partisan lines. In the following months, something shifted in American political discourse. Starting in digital spaces dominated by young people, the confrontation between AOC and Barron Trump and its unlikely resolution became a case study in communications schools. a topic of viral essays, and a catalyst for conversations that mainstream politics refused to have. About how to judge privilege without denying effort. About how to recognize systemic inequality without assassinating individual character. About how two people from opposite political extremes could find shared humanity without betraying fundamental principles. It didn't solve America's deep problems: growing inequality, tribal polarization, the collapse of democratic institutions, but it planted a seed of possibility that previous generations had declared dead. He continued studying, building his technology companies, maintaining the discreet profile that Melania had carefully cultivated, but his viral response, that simple post about purpose versus privilege, continued resonating. It became a manifesto for young conservatives who wanted to redefine what it meant to be right-wing in post-Trump America. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remained one of the most combative voices of the American left, never backing down from her fight for economic and environmental justice. But that moment of vulnerability, admitting error, seeking dialogue, paradoxically, made her stronger, not weaker, because it showed that firm principles and intellectual humility could coexist. Years later, when interviewers asked Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about that viral moment, she responded with a phrase that would become characteristic. "I learned that you can criticize the system that created privilege without destroying the person who was born into it. And more importantly, I learned that listening isn't agreeing. It's simply recognizing that complex stories deserve more than simplistic headlines." As for Barron Trump, he rarely commented on the incident. But in a rare interview, years later, when pressed about the moment that catapulted him into public consciousness, he said something that perfectly captured the philosophy he had demonstrated in that viral response. "Privilege doesn't choose you. But what you do with it, that's a choice. And that's the only thing that really matters." A reminder that the next generation born into polarization, raised in division, expected to perpetuate hatred, could choose a different path. Not through naivety or denial of the deep injustices still tearing the country apart, but through the brutal recognition that complexity is uncomfortable, dialogue is difficult, and real change begins, not with deafening screams, but with the silent courage to truly listen. And when the clip of that first post from Barron Trump, "Privilege is having a platform, purpose is what you build when nobody's watching," was shared years later, young people across all political spectrums found in it not a partisan statement, but a universal truth, a truth that both Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Barron Trump, in radically different ways, had demonstrated: that the weight of public expectations only destroys us if we forget who we are when the cameras turn off. The response had gone viral in minutes, but its impact would echo for generations.